The truth of the matter is Dawn Staley did not come straight out and actually say that Caitlin Clark, even despite how well she's actually been playing the last couple months, would have still made this USA basketball team. I absolutely love how Mike Tirico jumps in and is basically asking Dawn Staley, has she improved that much in the last couple months? Look, ultimately, when you think about this USA basketball team and the organization that sits above it, the decision to not allow Caitlin Clark actually on this team is one of the most ridiculous decisions of all time for a wide variety of reasons. As for Dawn Staley's comments a little earlier in the day, we have to remember that Dawn Staley, as much as I love Dawn Staley is definitely one of the key voices, one of the key people behind the decision to not allow Caitlin Clark to actually play on this team. Now, I am not saying Dawn Staley is a bad person or anything like that at all. In fact, Dawn Staley is a great person. She's actually a great coach. But the decision to sort of spin the wheel and land on the part of the wheel that indicates Caitlin Clark wasn't good enough to actually be on this USA basketball team is ridiculous. It's almost as if those people did not watch what Caitlin Clark did in her last 2 years at the University of Iowa. Plus, what Caitlin Clark has actually been going through playing in the WNBA. You have to remember that there isn't much of a layoff between the college season and the actual professional women's basketball season. Caitlin Clark at some point is going to be playing basketball for almost a calendar year without any sort of real long break. Ultimately, adjusting to the WNBA does take some time, and it takes some time for everybody. And Dawn Staley knows that, as does the actual current head coach of the USA basketball team. But to say that she's suddenly improved so much over the past couple of months that we would now consider her a little bit more than we did before is absolutely still a ridiculous statement. Why not just come out and say, we made a mistake. Caitlin Clark could have easily played on this USA basketball team, versus sort of dancing around the topic. I mean, if you go back and watch the video that I actually played, she doesn't actually come out and say, we made a mistake. She doesn't actually come out and say, we would put Caitlin Clark on this team definitely. That is not what was actually said during today's interview with Mike Tirico. Now, ultimately, I don't think, not having Caitlin Clark on the team is going to prevent the USA basketball team from running all over all the other teams that they're going to play. I'm sure the USA women's basketball team will ultimately come home with a gold medal. And yes, if Caitlin Clark was actually on this basketball team, she would improve this basketball team. But what have we seen with the Caitlin Clark effect over the past 24 months? Now, NBC's ratings came out and they were fantastic for the opening ceremonies. Over 28 million people tuned in to their networks, various networks, and of course Peacock to actually catch the opening ceremonies. Now, let me ask you this. How many more people do you think would have actually tuned in if Caitlin Clark was actually on that boat that was floating its way towards the Eiffel Tower? I mean, look, I don't know exactly what the Caitlin Clark effect would have been on the opening ceremonies, but I do know that their overall ratings would have been, and I'm confident to actually say this, considerably higher than they were. Now, I don't know if that's something just north of 30 million, But I do know that having Caitlin Clark on that boat floating towards the Eiffel Tower would have certainly increased the ratings a little bit more. That being said, yes, the USA women's basketball team made a terrible mistake by not including Caitlin Clark on this team. It's almost as if they didn't see or watch or pay attention to all of the things that have been coming along with the Caitlin Clark effect. It would be one thing if Caitlin Clark played the way she played early in the year and didn't show any signs of improvement. But we've seen a tremendous amount of improvement over Caitlin Clark in the WNBA over the last 2 months. And it was also obvious before this USA basketball decision came down that Caitlin Clark was ready to play on the USA basketball team. So for Dawn Staley and the rest of the people that actually got in a room or jumped on various Zoom calls to actually make those decisions, I think they took it too far. They were being way too political for, quite frankly, something that shouldn't be political. I do not understand why Eureka, for example, decided to pull her name out of the hat just because she knew that things were going to be political in the decision making around who makes and who doesn't make this particular basketball team. I've said this before, and I'm sure I'll say it again. The USA is so deep in women's basketball that they could have had a B team and maybe even a C team in the Olympics if the Olympic Committee allowed it. In other words, it's possible that the USA women's basketball teams, like in volleyball, beach volleyball, where we have multiple teams vetting for a gold, could have ended up in a world where we won a gold and a silver. But ultimately, when you really think about all of this, and there was all this talk about an Olympic boycott because Caitlin Clark wasn't going to play. I mean, that's just silly. That's just silly and dumb on so many different levels. I'm not going to boycott the Olympics simply because the committee didn't pick a particular player. However, that doesn't mean we can't voice our opinion on the actual subject, which is exactly what I'm doing here. I have nothing vested in this. I just hate to see something that's so obvious go in the absolute wrong direction. Now, this isn't life or death. And yes, the USA basketball team, the USA women's basketball team will be just fine. They will come home with the gold. But in terms of the overall ratings for those games, in terms of the uplift to the WNBA and the continued ongoing growth of women's basketball in North America, this certainly was a squandered opportunity by a couple people that decided they were playing political games. All right, North America, that's all I have for you tonight on The Underrated. I'm Dave DeBaugh. Hey, thanks so much for tuning into The Underrated. For The Underrated, once again, I'm Dave DeBaugh, wishing you all a tremendous rest of your sports viewing day. And to the guitar riffs we go.
You've been listening to The Underrated Podcast with Dave DeBaugh, presented by underrated.media.